Evan sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the blank screen of his laptop. The cursor blinked mockingly, as if reminding him of all the time he had wasted. His unfinished manuscript, the one he had promised himself he would complete years ago, remained untouched. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, sighing deeply. The weight of unfulfilled potential pressed heavily on his chest. He had always told himself that success was just around the corner, that he needed the right inspiration, the right opportunity, the right time. But now at 32, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Time wasn't waiting for him. It never had. A notification pinged on his phone. It was a message from Marcus, his best friend, and once his biggest supporter. Evan, when are you going to stop doubting yourself? Your time is now. Stop waiting. Evan clenched his jaw. He knew Marcus was right. He had been making excuses, letting fear dictate his choices. But what if he wasn't good enough? What if he failed? The thought gnawed at him, but a stronger voice, one he had ignored for too long, whispered back, "What if you succeed?" He pushed his chair back and stood up, pacing the room. He thought about all the people who had achieved their dreams. They weren't necessarily the smartest, the most talented, or the luckiest. They were simply the ones who decided to start. The ones who refused to let fear paralyze them. The walls of his apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a cage. Stacks of old notes, half-finished ideas, and discarded plans lay scattered around. They were evidence of every time he had started something and abandoned it. Every time he had let self-doubt win. He walked to the window and looked outside. The city was alive, cars moving, people walking with purpose, chasing their dreams. And here he was stuck. Not because he lacked the ability, but because he had convinced himself that he wasn't ready. But when would he be ready? Suddenly, he remembered something his father had once told him. "Evan, the greatest lie we tell ourselves is that we have more time." His father had worked hard his entire life, always saying he would travel, write a book, and enjoy his passions once he retired. But retirement never came. He had passed away before he ever got the chance. Evan felt a lump in his throat. He had inherited his father's dreams but also his fears. The fear of starting, the fear of failing. But what if he ended up the same way, waiting for a future that never came? Determination surged through him. He grabbed a notebook and started writing. Not overthinking, not doubting, just writing. Words flowed from his mind, messy but real. He wasn't just making notes, he was making a plan. Step 1. Finish the manuscript. No excuses. Step 2. Reach out to Marcus. He needed support. Step 3. Take the leap, submit his work. Face rejection if necessary, but try. The weight on his chest lightened. He had a plan. And more importantly, he had momentum. His time wasn't in some distant future. It was here. It was now. Evan sat at his desk, staring at the blinking cursor. But this time, he wasn't frozen in fear. He had promised himself he would start, and that meant no more hesitating. He took a deep breath and began to type. The words weren't perfect, but they didn't have to be. What mattered was that he was moving forward. He wrote for 2 hours straight, losing himself in his story. For the first time in a long time, he felt alive. The self-doubt still lingered, but he refused to let it control him. Each word he typed was a small victory against the voice that had held him back for so long. A knock at the door startled him. He stretched his arms and checked the time, nearly midnight. Who could be visiting this late? He opened the door to find Marcus standing there grinning. "Figured you might need some motivation," he said, holding up 2 cups of coffee. Evan chuckled and let him in. "I appreciate it," he said, taking a cup. "I actually started writing again." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "No way. For real?" Evan nodded. "For real." Marcus sat down across from him. "That's what I like to hear. But listen, man, writing is just the first step. You need to commit. No more excuses." "I know," Evan admitted. "That's why I'm going to set a deadline. 1 month. I'll finish the manuscript no matter what." Marcus smirked. "That's more like it. And when you do, we celebrate." Evan took a sip of coffee, feeling a sense of excitement he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a dream anymore. It was happening. Evan had done it. The manuscript was complete, but the journey was far from over. Now came the hardest part, sharing it with the world. The fear of rejection loomed over him, but he refused to let it win. He submitted his manuscript to publishers and awaited their responses. Days turned into weeks. Rejection emails came in, each one a sting, but he reminded himself that failure was part of the journey. Then one day, an email arrived that changed everything. A publisher was interested. Not just interested, they loved his work. They wanted to offer him a deal. Evan sat in shock, rereading the email. He had spent years doubting himself, making excuses, and waiting for the right time. But the truth had always been simple. His time was now. Tears filled his eyes as he called Marcus. "I did it. They want to publish my book." Marcus whooped over the phone. "I knew it. I told you, Evan. You just had to start." Evan laughed through his tears. He had done it. He had proven to himself that success wasn't about waiting for the right moment. It was about creating it. As he looked out at the city, he realized something. Life would always present obstacles. Fear would always whisper doubts. But he had learned the most important lesson of all. Success wasn't about luck or timing. It was about choosing to act. And now, as he stepped into this new chapter, he knew one thing for certain. His time had finally come.